Good morning. How wonderful to be with you all. At last, I was hoping actually to speak to you back in 2021, and when COVID thwarted that plan in 2022, thwarted again. The thoughts that I was planning then to share with you about our culture's pessimism, even apocalypsism, those were feeling a little too apt there. But here we are, and I wonder how you're feeling about the beginning of a new year in work, in life, in world events, how much optimism and energy you're able to muster after the last few years. One place to look perhaps for prognostications about 2023, to read the entrails to see kind of which way the wind is blowing, might be, why not, the dictionaries. Each year, as I'm sure you're aware, these august institutions declare a particular word or phrase the word of the year. Here are just two of those from 2022. Collins Dictionary landed on permacrisis. This is a combination of permanent and crisis to kind of sum up our sense of things these days. One writer put it like this: permacrisis is a term that perfectly embodies the dizzying sense of lurching from one unprecedented event to another, as we wonder bleakly what new horrors might be around the corner. I wonder if that resonates. The other is from the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, which, based on a public vote, declared the word of the year for 2022 to be goblin mode. 2 words. It was the first I'd heard of it, but apparently fully 93% of people who voted opted for it, so it must be striking a chord with a lot of us. Oxford defines goblin mode as a type of behaviour which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly, or greedy, typically in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. Goblin mode is a response to being expected to kind of go back to normal after years of disruption, a hunkering down, a retreat, a choosing comfort instead, in the face of permacrisis, presumably. Feeling overwhelmed? Embrace your inner goblin. Goblin mode is essentially like the opposite of how you all look right now. I hope that here at the beginning of 2023 you are as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as you look, eager to get stuck in, that you're feeling whatever the opposite of goblin mode is, elvish, I don't know, equal to any crisis, local or global, that may arise. But also, it would be understandable if, in the face of environmental and economic crisis, in the face of war and the threat of war and political intractability, in the shadow of the so-called Great Resignation and the spectre of burnout for so many people, if you're feeling less than primed for 2023. Here's someone who knows how you feel, if that's the case. We know him only as the teacher, though he's traditionally identified with King Solomon. And he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, that ancient Jewish book of wisdom, which is essentially the book that, if you're reading it for the first time, is most likely to make you go, wait, this is in the Bible? This is how Ecclesiastes begins. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labours at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. The teacher knows our frustration with time and change, or the lack of it. He knows the slog of the school term, of the work year, the disillusionment of the news cycle, of social problems that never seem to get fixed or stay fixed, of history repeating itself. Life under the sun, life in this marvelous and bleak and frustrating world that we live in, is constant change, and also that weary feeling that nothing ever really changes, nothing sticks. What do people gain from all their labours at which they toil under the sun? All things are wearisome, more than one can say. What has been will be again. What's even the point? The teacher knows our weariness and our disillusionment, but he does not stay there. He does not opt for goblin mode, and he does not accept permacrisis as either a new state of affairs, nothing new under the sun, or as a full-orbed account of our reality. If in chapter 1 that I've read from to you there, he's describing a kind of glass half empty vision of entropic human life. Everything falls apart, everything repeats itself. By chapter 3, read for us earlier, he's offering instead the glass half full version of that same relentless cyclical reality. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, to pluck up what is planted, kill, heal, break down, build up. A time to weep, a time to laugh. You get the idea, yeah? Here, life is not simply repetition, it's not simply monotony or slog. It's rhythm, it's seasonal, it's purposeful. In place of cynicism or despair, the teacher advocates an acceptance of the need to discern what this particular moment requires and to gear up for that. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time for weeping and for laughter, a time for silence, and a time to speak. We do not control our circumstances or the time in which we find ourselves, but whatever the current crisis, whatever the demands of the current moment, it is a particular season, and it requires something particular of us. Here's what I want to do in the time that I have with you this morning. I want to affirm you in a sense of your vocation, a sense of the importance of what it is you do, and the importance of it being you that does it. And I want to propose to you two things that the current moment requires of all of us, two things that all moments require, really, which are humility and hope. Humility and hope. I don't know if you conceive of your work in terms of vocation, of calling. A Gallup poll that is 10 years old now, but was the most detailed study ever carried out of how people feel about the thing that we spend most of our waking lives doing, our jobs. This poll found that only 13% of people say that they are engaged in their work. They find it meaningful, they look forward to it. Some 63% say they are not engaged, which Gallup defined as sleepwalking through their workday. And 24% are actively disengaged. They hate it. 10 years and a pandemic later, it's doubtful, I think, that those numbers will have improved any. Now, I'm not looking to provoke any midlife crises here today. Work is hard. Even the most rewarding and important work is hard. And our culture's rhetoric of following your dreams and finding profound fulfillment in your chosen career can easily become burdensome rather than liberating. But I think that the traditional Christian idea of vocation helps us out here. One famous summary of that idea comes from a guy called Frederick Buechner, who said that the place you're called to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place you're called to, the place God calls you to, was his belief and mine, is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The beauty of Buechner's formulation is that it affirms both that you, the individual, are needed, you are significant, you are specific. The things that make you tick, that make you glad, that make you come alive, those come from somewhere, and they're leading you somewhere. But also, they're not just for you, for your glory or pleasure or success. God gives you those well springs of delight, of usefulness, for the good of others, in order to meet the various hungers of the world around us, for justice and fairness, for safety and care, for meaning and connection. This at once lays a responsibility on us, and it takes a burden off us. You cannot do everything. Your gifts and your sphere of influence are specific, but you're needed. And the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger is a not uncomplicated but genuine place of flourishing for you and for others. A proper sense of vocation will enjoin upon us both humility and hope. Humility because what do we have that we have not been given, and given for the good of others? And hope because there is a purpose and a direction to our labours, to our very existence. If you look with me at the passage from Romans that's printed in your service sheet, the Apostle Paul here is writing to the fledgling Christian community in Rome. And the vision that he offers them for this new life that they've undertaken together as followers of a crucified Messiah is one of mutuality and interdependence. It's a life of love. The community of Christians at Rome, like all the first century churches and like many churches today, alas, not all of them, it cut across the most deeply entrenched lines of a highly stratified society, the lines of race, gender, and class. This community included Jews and Gentiles, who formerly would not even have eaten a meal together, the enslaved and the freeborn, the wealthy and the poor. It set women in positions of honour and authority. Paul tells this radical new kind of community, every one of you needs every other. Just as in a body, some parts are more obviously useful or get more attention than others, yet all are necessary. In his analogy, no body is an appendix. So the community relies upon each one of you exercising the different gifts you have, being given for this very purpose. Now, Paul is describing specifically the life of the church here, but this logic of mutual service and dependence has over centuries reconfigured our society, the way we think about having or being a society, in ways small and large. If the ancient world into which Christianity erupted was a world of slave empires, which viewed the vast majority of people as simply not mattering, and the perhaps 1/3 of the population who were enslaved as just intended by nature for enslavement, as mere instruments, you kind of get a sense of how radical this other vision, this other logic really was. In Romans there, you can see the ethical implication, one ethical implication of all this for Paul in the first verse. I say to everyone among you not to think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment. For we who are many are all members of one another. Humility, acknowledgement of our need for others and our responsibility to them. It's a lesson that was writ large for us, wasn't it, from March 2020 onwards, as it became clear that essential workers and valued workers were in many cases quite different categories. As the background machinery of our society became suddenly more visible, supply chains and the movement of people, the components of our daily lives and fundamental, including mental health needs, as all of that became more visible, our interdependence, the necessity of seeing our common life in terms of mutuality and attentiveness to the needs of others, all that sharpened into view. The work that you all do is hard work. Also, it's prestigious work. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. We are members, one of another. Later on in that passage, verse 10, outdo one another in showing honour. As Paul says elsewhere, in another place that he uses this metaphor of the body, show special honour to the parts that lack it, to the people that seem to lack it. To acquit ourselves well in our respective vocations requires humility. It also requires hope. When hope wavers, when that sense of permacrisis engulfs the horizon, or when the daily grind makes us forget that the horizon is even there, when hope wavers, so does our sense that what we do could possibly matter, our sense that things could ever really change. For the last few years, I've been paying particular attention to the apocaholism of our culture, the way that in our news headlines and the stories we tell, the movies we make, we frame our problems and challenges in ever more apocalyptic end of the world as we know it terms. I've been thinking about what it looks like to retain hope in the face of a climate emergency and a mental health crisis and an ever-intensifying polarization that poisons our common life. And here's the conclusion I've come to. There are some workarounds to this, sort of, but at bottom, our capacity for hope about the future, our capacity to continue to labour for the good in the face of odds that don't look so great, is going to be a function of what you think reality is really like deep down. Let me give you just two examples. There's a huge spectrum here. Mark Manson, who in 2019 published a book that you'll have seen on the airport shelves, you may have read it, called Everything is Effed. I'm sanitizing slightly here in the cathedral. Everything is Effed, a book about hope. He explains in very clear terms what he thinks the world is actually like. He writes, "If I worked at Starbucks, instead of writing people's names on their coffee cup, I'd write the following: one day, you and everyone you love will die. And beyond a small group of people for an extremely brief period of time, little of what you say or do will ever matter. This is the uncomfortable truth of life. And everything you think or do is but an elaborate avoidance of it. We are inconsequential cosmic dust, bumping and milling about on a tiny blue speck. We imagine our own importance. We invent our purpose. We are nothing. Enjoy your coffee." For Manson, hope is a trick that we humans play on ourselves to get through the day. Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. You could hardly articulate a view more diametrically opposed to the account of vocation that I've been trying to sketch for you here this morning. The Christian Starbucks spiel might assert instead that you are loved into being at a particular time and place, that you're gifted with purpose, that you're known and necessary, that your importance is bestowed, not manufactured, that you're part of a story bigger than yourself. Obviously, both of these employees would be instantly and justly fired from Starbucks. Just get the people their coffee. But here's another way of conceptualizing reality in a bedrock kind of way. So this comes from the 19th century abolitionist minister, Theodore Parker, but was made famous by Martin Luther King Jr. As a kind of underpinning to the civil rights struggle. I'm sure you have heard it before. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, these are both statements of faith. We are inconsequential cosmic dust. The arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. Rival versions of the world that we live in, neither totally provable, and both are plausible depending on where you're standing. Of course, it's much easier to persevere in a vocation to persevere as workers and parents and friends and activists and just humans if hope and justice are actually built into the fabric of the universe rather than something arbitrary we've invented ourselves that's utterly precarious. Of course, that it makes things easier is not in itself a reason to prefer that account if it doesn't actually correspond to the contours of reality, if it's not actually true. You know, I wanted to share with you today some wisdom from the Jewish and Christian scriptures for you and for our moment. And whether or not you credit them as scripture, I hope that you get from them some sense of what it is that is enduring and powerful and provoking in these ancient words, which have been tested in the crucible of human experience across centuries and millennia. I hope some of this resonates for you, whatever it is you do believe about bedrock reality. It is the case, though, I must acknowledge that all of this stuff about vocation and humility and hope, that it will make most sense, it will slot into place in the context of the invitation of Jesus to come to him and give up our burdens in exchange for what he calls his yoke. The life that he offers is still a yoke. It's not idleness, it's not limitlessness. We're built for service. But his claim is that this yoke is service that frees. It's rest, a rest that is deep and abiding in a restless and weary world. The life that he offers actually is his own. Let me return to the beautiful and cryptic words of Ecclesiastes to conclude here. After assuring us that there is a season for everything in this world, the teacher asks, verse 9, "What gain have the workers from their toil?" A question worth asking at the beginning of another year. What gain have the workers from their toil? He's, not talking about billable hours. Rather, his next words acknowledge our longing for permanence and perfection, our hope for something beyond the mess and slog, and also the reality of our limitations, the good that I can do while I live in the particular crisis of the moment. I'm going to read to you from a different translation of the Hebrew. He says, "I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, permanence, perfection. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God." In a few moments, you'll be given an opportunity to rededicate yourselves to the ideals and the principles of your profession. Tonight, you will eat and drink, those of you attending the dinner. I'm looking forward to joining you. And then next week, you will return to your labours. So, a blessing for you as you go out from here. May you eat and drink and find satisfaction in all your toil. This is the gift of God. Amen.